Okay, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for sticking with us for the last half or the last portion of our conference. We appreciate you so much for sticking around. As we continue to highlight community voices, I'm going to have an intimate conversation with a member of the Lao community, Cat Nakhornsak. I hope I'm pronouncing that
You're good.
correctly. I'm sorry. Is a member of the Lao community who has developed a perspective both professionally and personally about how problem gambling can impact an individual. So I want to, highlight again why it is very important for us to do more than just translate materials as we think about cultural competency and cultural awareness in addressing problem gambling. Kat, I'll let you say a little bit about yourself if there's anything you want to share as it relates to your experience with gambling, and then
Yeah.
we can
Hello,
start.
everyone. My name is Kat, and as we continue to speak today, and I'll share a lot about my lived experiences and context of what I've observed in the Lao community. Specifically, I grew up in Worthington, Minnesota, which is southwest. Does anyone know Worthington? Okay, quite cool. Okay, some hands there. Yeah, so southwest corner of Minnesota, we border Iowa and South Dakota, but there's a large Lao community down there. So if you think of the Twin Cities has a large Lao community, and then it breaks up into Worthington, and then up north, War Road has a large Lao community there. And I think for Worthington, it's just because the work that is available for a lot of immigrants, a lot of industrial work, and that's why my family moved there in 1990, 1991, 92, and has they're still there, and so I go home often, and so I still see a lot of what impacts the community, and so when I talk about my lived experiences, it is a lot that it's really catered to the community that I grew up in. I've been in the Twin Cities post college 2013 now, and so it's been a good few years here, and have been learning about the Lao community up here, and very similarities of problem gambling impacting the communities around.
Wonderful. So, as I have been developing my knowledge about how problem gambling affects different communities, talking with you, I've learned a lot, about how specific problem gambling has, been prevalent in the Lao community and how different things have affected it, including some things that I learned about the history of gambling within the Lao community. So, can you talk to me a little bit about how the tradition of gambling is practiced within the family, within Lao families,
Yeah.
and what that looks like?
Yeah, gambling takes place in can be any place, not just at the casino. Historically, just of what I know, gambling is a very normalized practice in Laos. Even even today, you can buy numbers, which is their lotto, right? But they just call it numbers. You can pick numbers and stuff like that for their daily lottery. Even over here in the U.S., you can still play, but it's something that is both can be income for people and play. And we know the fine lines around that, but for folks back in the home country, it tends to be an income source and just a way of life. Traditionally, I've seen gambling my whole life. When I started to do this work, I would ask folks what is your first memory of gambling? And mine is just being a child, 5, 6, 7, and the elders, or I mean, they're elders now, but back then maybe they weren't. But my mom and their friends would get together at someone's house just to hang out on a random day, and they would play house cards. And my first experience with gambling is when my mom would have to go to the bathroom, and then I would take her spot. And so through that, I learned how to gamble, at least in that specific game. And there are traditional house cards that Lao people play. Um, there's like four cards and there's like I don't know, but it's similar to like when you think of like poker and stuff like that. But it's like very mathematic, and so it's like fun. And then there's like money involved, right? And when you're a child and you're like, ooh, money, like there's it's very intriguing. And I see that in my toddler niece today, like when there's gambling taking place and there's money involved, and she wants part in that too, just because like people are engaged with it. And it's a very like communal thing as well. And so gambling will is like a source of community and like gathering. And so it's played like house cards are played at any big event or even small event. Like someone in the Worthington community just had like their daughter had a baby or whatever, and so like the elders, like my mom and her friends, would go over to their house and they would just play a friendly hand of game and just like hang out, and that's like their way of like welcoming new life and being part of that community. Yeah, it's just like everywhere all the
Yeah.
time.
You know, what you just described to me, someone earlier shared a quote about it being in their blood, and I feel like you just kind of illustrated that for me about how
Yes.
that can look, right? Um, so another thing that you kind of brought up is how there are these different factors, right, that play into this part of tradition. So you've talked about family having these gatherings, how it's communal, and we've also talked about how religion plays a part in this as well now too. Can you talk a little bit about what that looks like now?
The religion portion.
Mm-hmm.
The religion portion, I would say, is not. I don't know how to put it into words. There is like a separation of that between gambling, but money, I want to say, like is a big part of the religion of Buddhism. There's a lot of giving, right? A lot of charity, a lot of donation, a lot of so like in Sunday service, we would go to the temple and give alms, and a lot of donation would be involved in that. And when there's like a big event, it's just interesting to see like how the money like moves around in the community, and there's a lot of giving, and it kind of like stays within the community. And so there's not necessarily like gambling happening at the temple, but there's definitely like still like conversations and like the money that you win, it's like, oh, I can give more to the temple now,
Mm-hmm.
and therefore like get good blessings and good karma indeed and stuff like that. And so it is like this kind of like cycle like of like money and community and just like how it works, like the own like little economy, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
in the community.
Okay. Another thing that we've talked about that for me was really important was language, right, as a barrier. And that really speaks out to me because I know a lot of people look at language and translation as the first way to make sure that they're being inclusive of other communities. But particularly for the Lao community, we've talked about why that can even be a challenge, right? Because there are some generational differences in how language is interpreted and some challenges there. Can you talk to me a little bit about that and why even just translating materials can be a challenge in terms of addressing problem gambling in the Lao community?
Yeah, definitely. Even for myself, like being the youngest in my family, out of four siblings, and trying to communicate with my parents is very difficult. They don't know, English very well, and when I just like need to express things, that's like things don't translate like word for word, and that goes with like translated materials. When I was doing work around this and holding workshops in the community with like elders around their gambling habits, and trying to take that information and to like utilize it into like social media stuff like awareness, was really difficult just because like things don't translate well to English, and I want to say like things just often get lost in translation. Even when we are, because for me, a lot of this is around like mental health, and and just even like discussing or having trying to have conversations around mental health in the Lao community is very it's very new because we don't have those conversations, and there's not a lot of like language that directly ties to specific words as well. Like there is a word for crazy, and that's just like how you call everything, right? But it doesn't really get into the very like detailed things. Like you can't just call like this is not just like all crazy. But that's like kind of the only word that I can think of to just like to describe things, and it doesn't do it justice, and so that's very difficult. Beyond like translated materials, just being able to like have a conversation is very difficult, and if you don't like have the proper resources around that, things can it just doesn't work out.
Yeah. A part of what you've mentioned before about it being difficult to have the conversation comes from some of the stigma, right, that's attached to problem gambling. And in the conversations that we've had, the stigma, there's some uniqueness around what the stigma is and what the stigmas are that are attached to problem gambling for the Lao community. Can you talk a little bit about what some of those different stigmas look like in terms of being someone who might be, popular for gambling, or someone who might not want to be labeled as a gambler, or what comes with being labeled as someone who struggles with gambling?
Yeah. When I think about like the stigmas, and I think about like the people that I know that gamble, which is like one, my entire family, and a lot of the other community members in Worthington. I think about like the shame it can bring to lose, and you don't talk about it when you lose, right? People just know when you win, and if you win a lot, people know that, but people don't know how much or how deep you lose. Our friend earlier was talking about like a secret life, and I wonder what like so my brother is a really big gambler, and he is 10 years older than me, and at one point just like borrowing money and this and that, and there's just like now like to be older I like think about like his secret life. Like there's things that I know, but like there's a lot of things that I don't know, but I know that it's like super deep, like the debt and the borrowing and all that stuff. But we don't talk about it because there's just like I don't know,
Yeah.
there's so much like in the Lao community there's like things around like losing face, and you never want to lose face, even especially with your own family, right? And I think there's just like I don't know. I mean, he's the oldest too, so it's just like I think there's a lot of like responsibility and pressure, but then in other ways, like there's a lot of shame, when you can't like provide, or when you're asking your little sister for money because you can't pay your bills. And yeah, And so even for me, like, I don't even want to ask these questions. And it's like, but doing this work, I'm just like, oh, I want to know more.
Yeah.
I would just want to know like how deep that it gets, but it's also like scary to like, because I also don't want to put people in that position, especially my own family, to like see how deep it is.
Yeah.
And so, and in the larger community, like everyone gambles, and everyone knows that you gamble. But right, again, like you know when people win and you know when they lose, or you don't know when they lose, but you kind of do.
Yeah.
And one thing I've learned in this work as well is like the act of like gambling and like going to the casino can be a communal thing. So like my parents will, you know, gather their posse, load them up in the van, and go on their little trip. Excuse me. But it's like when people go by themselves, there's like a little like stigma around that as well. So that doesn't either it doesn't happen often or people like don't talk about when, you know, they go by themselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you touched on a couple of things for me, especially, talking about how this can be like a communal activity, right? As people going as a group together. And it makes me think about actually the talk that we had a little bit earlier that was talking about addressing this as a family issue. So I think right there we were highlighting again how all of this stuff is really connected and why that's important. So now I want to talk to you a little bit about, we know that gambling is prevalent in the Lao community, and I know personally that there are organizations locally that have been working at this for a very long time, but we're still seeing like so much pushback from the community. And we've talked about a couple of different barriers, which could be, language, stigma. What, in your perspective, would be, something that we can do now, right, to help people to even begin having these conversations? Because I find it interesting that if you, as someone who is involved in this work, finds it challenging to have that conversation, then we really need to think deeply about what resources can we develop to even start that conversation. Yeah.
Yeah, many barriers around like language and access and resources and just like the competency of it, right? If we don't have professionals in the community or know the language, they can't receive those same services. I think as I've been seeing like the big, what is it? The big like I don't know what the word I'm looking for, but like I see community, right? Like gambling is community, and so how do we do we make this like a communal space? And then the other things that I see is like mental health and financial resources as well, because a lot of what I observe in even in my own family, there's just like a lot of survivor mode, and it still has been for even if it's been 30 years, and folks are still trying to like figure it out, and I think one of the ways that I have been approaching this work is like if they're not gambling, what are they doing? So like highlighting those things that folks already do in the community. So like the temple is a big place, right? For folks in the Lao community. So like each like the regions that I talked about, like War Road, the Twin Cities, and Worthington, they all have their own Buddhist temples, and there's a lot of involvement around that. And so it's like, okay, I don't know the answers of what it can do, but like, how do we use that as like a place? Because like, right, if they're not gambling, what else are they doing? Fishing was a thought that I had, a lot of like fishing in our communities. And that goes back to like right back in the home country and how fishing was both like for play and resources. But it's still something that folks still like treasure today. So like what does that look like? Or I'm thinking about like the the things that the community already enjoys, because gambling is a sense of enjoyment even when they lose. And so how to replace that. And one of the things for me too is just being in like a younger generation, it's like I can recognize like other ways to bring joy and experience joy in my life, that's not gambling. But it's like for Worthington, which is, you know, a small town, like what does that look for them? And then with my family that I see, like fishing, foraging, like eating, like
Yeah.
those are things that, you know, I'm like, okay, if this looks like in bigger practice, like if they're not gambling, what else are they doing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So related to that, as a former community engagement researcher, a lot of the times when I think about developing, culturally relevant resources and initiatives, I too think about, what is already happening in the community that we can build off of or develop, to sort of keep people doing practices that they already do, but learning how to do it more responsibly or in a different way. So some other things that have come up in conversations that you and I have had about this, were maybe treatment that incorporates healing circles, right? Can you talk a little bit about that practice and what that looks like for your
Yes.
community?
Yes. I think part of it is like to not go like very like straightforward to it. Like I don't know how to put it into words, but like very at the face, right? But to get folks to like understand their habits and understand like their current habits of like what does it look like when you gamble? Do you go by yourself? Do you go with a group? Is it just casinos? Is it the lotto? Is it sports? Or is it just like socialize when there's a gathering at a house or something? And then like part of what healing circles can look like is for folks just to understand their own habits, and because I don't think that is something that is recognized, like how often, you know, and to kind of make mental note of what that looks like. And I think there's like a shared experience as well, to know that you're not alone in it, is what I like would envision healing circles would bring. And it's you know, doing this work, it's can be very scary, and to like really just ask people, or I guess my approach would be more of like a harm reduction than like stop doing it, because I don't think that would that would not work.
Right. Probably not at this point. That may or may not be, the answer for people. But what I think is really important is that we do consider that people take in information in different ways, that there are different, factors and influences that are a part of all of us that, contribute to how things manifest for us and what it would look like for us to get better and move to a path of healing. So that pretty much concludes the questions that I had for you that are specific to your experiences with the Lao community and problem gambling. And I'll turn it over to the audience for any questions or comments for Kat or myself as it relates to this conversation.
Hi. Thank you for that. And it's occurred to me before, but when I heard you talking about the role of gambling in your community, I sometimes wonder if it wouldn't be important to reframe back to our communities how that has changed, how the modern manifestation of gambling is not the same. And you alluded to that when you said the money used to stay in the community. So in Canada, our First Nations do have long traditions of gambling at festivals all night long. But in those instances, that money stayed within the community and there was a certain transparency around winning and losing. So, two things that contribute to gambling problems or to harm from gambling weren't there before. A, the money stayed within the community, and B, everyone knew who won and who lost. And now you have these multinational corporations that come in and they provide gambling, and the money leaves the community, and there's no longer that transparency of who won and lost. And sometimes I think reflecting back to the community, yes, it's culturally embedded, but it happened very differently. It looked very different from going to a casino or going and playing online now.
Definitely. Thank you for bringing that up. It, yeah, such a revelation to think like how money has transformed into the different like spaces of community and now, and so much of the accessibility of like being able to like go to other places. Within Worthington, there are like, let me think, one, two, three, four big casinos that people have access to, and they all like right have a different favorite one. So there's like Grand Falls in Iowa, and then Marshall has, I think, the one in Prairie Edge or something like that. Um, and up here, like moving to the Twin Cities, like I see these Mystic Lake buses that will pick up people, and so they don't even have to worry about transportation. They give them the experience and the accessibility to go play and make it fun for them, and then they safely drop them off back in their neighborhoods. And it's like they're building their own like community in that sense. But yeah, it's a wild thought. Yes. Uh-huh. And even in community, I've seen some like I call them predatory behavior because I think that's what it is. Where like so in what I know in the Lao community with my father and the elders around him, money will move around in different ways. And so I don't know if other communities have this, but there's like a, what do you call it? Where it's like a fund where everyone pays into.
Yeah, in
And
some
then
communities we call it a susu.
susu, a susu, and then like so like right, people will pay into this pot of money, and then like one person will get it every month or whatever. So it's like a circle of how that happens. And then other ways it kind of will predatory but also stays in the community. Like if you borrow money from someone, there's a large interest rate. Larger, it's like $50 every 1,000. And so when my own family member was $6,000 in debt with someone, they were just paying the interest every month on a fixed income, right? And so they were never ever going to get out of that when you're paying like $600 in interest rate. But then again, like you borrow a family member, they're not going to take away your house, your car, your belongings. You borrow a bank, then they'll come after all those things. And so that's also how like money works that I found in the community. This wasn't from the Worthington community, but I had heard in Des Moines that like there's folks in the community like that they have money, right? And so they often will be like the banker or the borrower or the shark, I guess is what you call them. And so they'll purposely like go to casinos expecting people to lose, and they'll be their banker when they lose, because they know that they can collect money off of their interest, just alone. So it's very lucrative.
Well, first I want to say the buses, the bus issue. I used to work in the Phillips neighborhood, which is Franklin and Portland area, Bloomington area. Anyway, the buses would come down from Mystic Lake, and they target the poor neighborhoods just to pick up people. I just had to say that. Anyway, for gambling. But I wanted to know from the Lao community, how far will they go to bail out a family member? I mean, will they just keep doing it? Or I presume that they will go to the elders and say, I owe this money, and and there's shame, of course, attached to it because they can't pay it. How often do you feel that could occur before they would say enough is enough?
I think yeah, I can only give what I know. For example, my own father borrowed someone $6,000 from a family, right? And so he's on a fixed income, and so was only making that. So I guess that was like his hard point. And then he asked his children to help. And I had a fit. And in the end, my sister took all that debt for him. So like, bless her heart. And I guess like that is, I don't know their level, but I guess in that situation, I don't know. And that's, I don't know if I have the words, but like or I guess I can't like project what I think their experiences were. But for my dad, like at one point, when you're paying just interest every month and not getting to like, the principal of it, like that was like, I didn't know how long he had that debt. And at one point, I guess he just realized like he couldn't get out of it. And then for my sister, who, I mean, for me, like, it also was like a very, I don't know, hard to deal with. Like, I gave in, but I also like was like, I'm so over this, in a sense. And then whereas my sister like ended up just taking on the entire debt for him. And I guess she hasn't also reached her capacity yet. So the level of it, and it's very hard, I think, for me as like a child of immigrant and like growing up with this like notion of like you have to do better than us. Like we sacrifice so much to get you here, and there's like this dutiful daughter expectation that I have, that's hard to like let go when I know better. And I don't know. I don't like, everyone has a threshold, that I've learned. And as I said earlier, like I'm scared to ask my brother what his secret life looks like. I only know their surface stuff of like when they go and if they win, like they'll, treat us for, make food and make a large meal for the family and stuff like that. But yeah, like I don't know what his threshold is, and I'm scared to even know what it is. But I think it's a lot. Sorry, I don't know what that kind of went on.
Kat, we really appreciate your honesty and sharing this. This is quite personal and not easy to communicate. And so really appreciate that. Thank you.
I think like what I've learned and like it was one of the I think that community leadership thing that we
community
did.
leadership
Yeah,
training.
and one of those things it really taught me like you just have to have the conversation. And being in this work in like a very new space for me, like I've learned that just having the conversation has just done so much for me in a way of like healing. I learned that I'm not alone in it at all, being like, you know, feeling all these responsibilities and financial duties. But I've learned that my peers are also like, have had their own messes with familial gambling and the things that they've had to deal with. But yeah, I just wanted to mention, like, I think that as a resource as well, and just like having the conversation with people. For the law community, we are not having these conversations. Like, there's like little tidbits of like comments and stuff like that. Like, my dad will even say like, "Oh, I lost all this money." He's like, "I have a problem and I'm gonna stop." But I know that's just like in the moment, right? And but like the part that I don't know is like how to like take that further and have like deeper conversations and deeper reflections and self-reflections. And I think that is the part too, is like for folks to just have some self-awareness and self-reflection of their habits, just themselves, right? And just like the awareness of what they're doing can start something.
Yeah. Well, Kat, thank you so much for your bravery and your vulnerability and for sharing this conversation. And if you took nothing else from this, just start the conversation if you can. Thank you all so much. Oh, let me just go ahead.